Welcome everybody, I am your host Obi, and this is another episode of Obi Spooky Stories. This one takes place in a cemetery, so I thought, why not tell it to you alone in a cemetery? What's wrong with me? Having the biggest channel in the topic of horror in the world, and that channel is this one right here. And the story that I'm about to tell you from this channel was shared in 2023. This story was sent to Ros by a person going by the alias of Ernesto. Ernesto was a former employee at a government-owned cemetery, and for obvious reasons, we cannot share Ernesto's real name or the place he used to work at, but trust me when I tell you this, Dross did all the digging and all the investigating, so he was able to confirm that all these places and evidence were real. Ernesto asked that this story be shared due to the depression and trauma that he suffered in the last event he experienced at this cemetery. In case you're not familiar, the bodies of the dead have to go through a process that's called inhumation. The hole in which they're buried in, which is surrounded by concrete walls and a concrete slab that covers the top, is called a housing. And after a certain amount of time, the body has to go through another process which is called reduction, which consists of having bugs or critters or anything of any sort, and including flesh, or what remains of it, removed from the body so it can be taken for cremation, and then the ashes given back to the family members. The duties of the protagonist of this story, which is Ernesto, consisted of opening the housing, taking the bodies for inhumation, and reduction, which would conclude to cremating and the ashes given to the family members. Once the ashes were turned into the family members, the housing would then be cleaned up and opened again for a new body to be delivered or buried. However, throughout the many years that Ernesto worked at this cemetery, he learned a few tricks. Along with his colleagues, they were aware that at certain times of the day the cemetery was open, so they were able to go in, remove the top of the housing, check the bodies that were just buried, and remove any piece of jewelry or even gold teeth. Another trick of the trade that Ernesto and his colleagues learned with time is that if there was a sweet yet repugnant smell coming from a housing, it usually meant that the body was not ready as of yet to go to the reduction process. When such event happened, the housing was then closed again, and the family was informed that the body of their loved one was not ready as of yet and to give it one more year. However, there was times when that excuse was given, but not for the reason that you're thinking of. This reason was a little bit more morbid. This was something that his colleagues and himself adopted as 2 for 1. This is probably the biggest secret shared among all the grave diggers around the world, or so Ernesto assumes. A secret that many promise to never confess. However, he's doing so today. What is a 2 for 1? It means that when a housing is opened, they end up finding an extra body along with the one they're supposed to take for reduction. Why is there an extra body, you're probably wondering? Many murderers realize that the best place to get rid of a body is the cemetery. Ernesto claims that the grave diggers, whether they like it or not, are the biggest accomplices to these crimes. You're probably wondering, why wouldn't they confess that they found an extra body? Well, the last person that he knows that confessed to a 2 for 1 was taken into custody and arrested, along with the crew. They were sent to trial as accomplices of a crime. So what happens when Ernesto and his crew find an extra body? Well, the first thing they do is they let the family members know that the body is not ready and has to remain for another year. They then leave the housing open and they come back that same day, preferably at night, so they can remove the extra body and take it for cremation, and thus getting rid of the evidence forever. For many years, Ernesto came across a lot of these 2 for 1s, until the last one when he finally called it quits. He claims it was a summer day, and they had the task to remove a body from a housing which should be ready for cremation. Ernesto thought that the day so far was going great, so they weren't really expecting any surprises. That was until they got to housing 253. As soon as they started removing the cover of the housing, a sweet, repugnant smell came from it. He moved the housing cover just enough to peek inside and to confirm that this was indeed a case of a 2 for 1. He closed the housing again very quietly, turned around and signaled to his crewmates 2 for 1. That same night, him and his crew came back because the crew couldn't believe what Ernesto had told them. However, none of them were ready for what they were about to witness. As soon as they opened it, the smell was unbearable. There it was, the body. Fresh, at least 2 weeks old. It was a female body. Her clothes were torn and she was laying on her back with her legs spread open. It was obvious that she was essayed before and after she was unalive. This isn't the worst part. Her hands were tied with barbed wire. It looked like she was beaten to death, and inside of her mouth was a large object. For obvious reasons, I cannot tell you what it was. Ernesto and his crew were frozen. They removed the extra body, placed it in a black garbage bag, and took it for cremation. Ernesto confesses that this was when the sleepless nights started, where the nightmares began, and where the depression took its course. All because of the image that he can't forget. The way that this girl was most likely tortured. The way that evidently she was essayed. But what haunts him the most is the size of the small body, because there was no way that she was older than 10 years old. Ernesto then ends the story saying, "May God and your audience forgive me, and may I soon find the peace and closure that the poor girl's family will never find." And that is it for today's story. Thank you guys very much. The last story got huge traction. Remember, the best way that you guys can help me out with this is if you hit like and share. I will try to bring you these weekly. I am your host, Obi. Thank you all and have a great night.